Lesson 27, we are going to be connecting the parabola with the quadratic equation. Well, what that means, first of all, lesson 26, we were talking about writing equations of linear functions, so straight lines, into standard form. Now we've got a new standard form equation. Main thing to remember with this, get it set equal to y, and then we can't have any parentheses. And then from there, put our x squared first, our x, and then our constant term at the end. Alright, so if we look down here, we need to solve this equation for y. So our first step is to subtract 2. Alright, so we've got 2y equals 5x squared plus 7x minus 2. And then we need to divide both sides by 2. So y equals 5 halves x squared plus 7 halves x minus 1. Remember, this divided by 2 goes with all three of them. Now that, right here, even though we have fractions, it's okay. Okay, with standard forms of quadratics, we can have fractions. It's okay too, it's just for linear equations where you can't. You have to have it set equal to y, so sometimes you're going to end up with fractions. For our second one here, we don't even have a y. Alright, so how do we deal with this? Well, the first thing to realize, f of x is the same thing as y. So we just rewrite this with our y in there. From there, we've got to make it look like this. Well, because of this set of parentheses in here, we got to do some work to make it look like that. So we've got to multiply out this x plus 4 squared. So that ends up being negative 3 times x squared plus 8x plus 16. Now remember, if you can't do that in your head, that is saying x plus 4 times x plus 4. So our first is x squared, outer is 4x, inner is 4x, so that's our 8x. 4 times 4 gives us 16. So then we have this plus 5 here. Now we've got to distribute this negative 3 through all of this. So y equals negative 3x squared minus 24x minus 48 plus 5. And now this is starting to look a lot like our standard form equation. We just got to combine our like terms. So y equals negative 3x squared minus 24x minus 43. And there's standard form. So then once we get this into standard form, the whole point is to be able to graph them. Alright, well, if you remember back to graphing parabolas before, if we started with y equals x squared, well, what we can always do is you can always put in points. So 0, 1, 2, negative 1, negative 2. I would put in at least 5. Alright, and normally we would start there. I'll tell you exactly where to start at in just a second. But if we start with 0, 0 squared is 0. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, negative 1 squared is 1, negative 2 squared is 4. So if we were to put this on the graph with those 5 points, it would end up looking like that, and then we just draw in our lines here. Alright, make sure it looks like a U, make sure you put arrows on the end of it. Okay, now, how do we know that those are enough points? The first thing that we need to find is we need to find our vertex. How we find our vertex is the equation, the x value of our vertex is negative b over 2a. You need to get that memorized. We will use it off and on for the rest of this year, for next year, for years after. Alright, so get that memorized. Negative b over 2a. Well, if we look at our equation here, our b was our value with our x. Well, we didn't have an x, so our b value has to be 0 here. So negative 0 over 2 times 1, well, 0 divided by 2 is 0. So this point ends up being our vertex. Well, that was our x, so then we gotta plug that in to our equation to solve for y. So here is our vertex. That's kind of like our bouncing point on each side of the vertex is exactly the same. Alright, so it's very important to be able to find that vertex, and that's what we're gonna do from here on out. Okay, but if you wanted to, you could make an XY chart. You just gotta find the vertex to be able to figure out how to do this. Alright, so if we do this one, x equals negative b over 2a. So that would be a negative 1 over 2 times 2, which gives us 1/4. Well, it's not a whole number, but you know, that's okay, we can work with it. So we gotta put a 1/4 in there. Alright, so 1/4 squared is 1/16 times 2 is 1/8 minus, we've got 1/8 minus 1/4 minus 6. Alright, so we gotta have common denominators here. 1/8, this ends up being 2/8. This is, what, 48 over 8? So we've got -1, negative 49/8. Alright, and then you're going to want to be able to do this, you're going to want to change this back into a mixed number. So this would be -6 and 1/8 here. Alright, so that is our vertex. Alright, from there we do need 2 points above it, 2 points below it. So we're going to work off of our vertex, the 1/4 here. Alright, so we're going to pick the 2 whole numbers right above it. So 1/4. The next biggest whole number is 1. Next one after that is 2. The 2 below it is 0 and -1. Now if we plug these in, this math is much easier. 2 times 1 is 2, minus 1 is 1, 1 minus 6 is -5. 2 in there, 2 squared is 4, times 2 is 8, minus 2 is 6, minus 6 is 0. Plug a 0 in here, 0 minus 0 is -6. -1 in, -1 squared is 1, times 2 is 2, plus 1, so 3 minus 6 is -3. So now, if we throw these on the graph, we've got a positive 1/4 down a little over 6. So you're going to have to kind of guess there about where the vertex is, alright? But the rest of them we can be spot on. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 0, 0, -6, and -1, -3. Now remember how I said once you find your vertex that both sides should look the same, and if you go back to our last graph here, both sides did look exactly the same, even the points matched up. That isn't going to be the case this time because of where our vertex landed. It landed on not right down the middle of a box, but closer to 0 than it did 1, so it's going to look a little bit off, but if we connect these dots well, we're going to be able to see that both sides still look pretty much the same, even with me drawing it in there. They look very, very similar. Alright, so that is the process for graphing these. Next one, same concept. X equals -b over 2a. So we've got a -1 over 2 times 1 is 1/2. Alright, still a fraction, but we can do it. Alright, so we throw a 1/2 in there. 1/2 squared is a 4th. A 4th minus a 1/2 is -1/2. Minus 6, that would be -6 and a 4th. Alright, from there, 2 whole numbers above. So 1 and 2 whole numbers below, which is 0 and -1. Then we throw those in. 1 minus 1 is 0, minus 6 is -6. 2, so 4 minus 2 is 2, minus 6 would be negative 4. For 0, that would be 0 minus 6. And negative 1 is 1 plus 1 is 2 minus 6 is negative 4. Now you might go, well, we had a fraction on the last one and it didn't match up very well, but we're going to this time even though we did have a fraction. A half splits that box right down the middle, so that's why it does work here. So we graph these out. We end up throwing these points on there. Let's see, 2, negative 4. All right. And there is our parabola. All right. When you do an XY chart, make sure you have 5 points. Get your vertex first. All right. And then remember, 2 points above, 2 points below. Graph it up, and then you should be done. All right. Any questions on graphing parabolas? It's not the easiest thing in the world. Do make sure you ask because we will use these the rest of the year.